Welcome to another episode of the Soul Minded Business Podcast. This is your host, J.D. Ross. Today's episode is going to be a solo. I'm just going to be doing this one by myself, and it's going to be on the greatest advice I ever received. By far, the greatest advice I ever received. But before we get started, I want to shout out to everyone out there that's listening. We're seeing the numbers grow across the country. Even we're getting some international listeners. We don't take one single listener for granted. We want to thank all those that are subscribing to our newsletter on our website, soulmindedbusiness.com, and to all the people that have helped put this together and our guests as well. Very grateful for all of that. And we started this from the very beginning saying if we had one person listening or we helped one person out, that was enough. So we don't take any of these for granted. It's not about the numbers. It's about an audience of one, and that's you out there listening or watching on YouTube if you're seeing me on YouTube. So let me get into this on the greatest advice I ever received. Now, it's not the greatest advice I've always listened to. It's easy to say and not always easy to do, but as a reminder to me, I have to keep this in the forefront and occasionally come back and say, am I doing this? I was very fortunate, I would say about 12 to 15 years ago, I can't remember the exact date, but I was very fortunate to not only hear this advice, but also see it demonstrated. So here's the advice. If you want to be better at business, serve. If you want to be better at whatever religious affiliation that you're associated with, serve. If you want to be a better spouse, serve. If you want to be a better leader, serve. And look, we're all leaders in some capacity. If you want to be a better parent, serve. If you want to be a better entrepreneur, serve. Name it. Whatever it is that you want to be better at, the secret and the best advice I've ever received was to serve. Do your best to serve on a higher level. Now, I've seen that demonstrated over the years, and I have been fortunate occasionally to get that one right, and it creates a bit of a magic. But there's a few things that you need to know as you go through this, and I have to remind myself of this as I try this as well. It's removal of ego is one of the keys of this. But let me go through some of these keys, and I'm going to end on a very simple example that I've experienced myself of how this was done. And I'm going to mention a tool also that was used, and this is how I saw it demonstrated so many years ago, and I'll never forget this. And when I use it today, it always works. So let's go through this. It's easy to say, serve, not always easy to do. And why is that? Well, here's some of the magic behind it. Serving in this way has to have a degree of serving without expectation. So let's look at it from a spouse standpoint. If my wife, Robin, says, hey, I really want you to do the dishes more often or take the trash out more often. So the key of that is that I do it without an expectation, or I do it without saying, hey, watch me. Do you notice me doing this? Do you hear me doing this? Do you see me doing this? That is one of the downsides, too, of some of the service activities that you see. Whoever you're serving, if there's a bit of, are you watching me do this? Are you hearing me do this? Because I'm looking for the attention, or I'm looking for something I can gain from this, or I want you to see me serving you. We see group service events that go down this path sometimes. You'll be serving somebody in need, and if you're not careful, it goes towards, do you see me serving you? Or who else sees me serving you? That's not the beauty of it. It's service without expectations is part of the magic. So you have to do that. Some of the simplest ways of doing a better job of serving is through contact. Just reach out to somebody and say, I was thinking about you today, and I was curious about how you're doing. And one of the guests that's coming up very soon, Sarge Summers, excellent guest, goes deep into the magic of his networking event, his connections, and even his faith. A real blessing to talk to him on this podcast. But one time he reached out to me, and I'd just gotten to know Sarge, just met him, called me on the phone, said, JD, I just want to see how you're doing. Just want to check in. It's a connection. And we're not wired that way these days because you're expecting something that they're going to want from you. In this case, I've kept going, okay, what's he going to want from me? He wanted nothing other than to check in on me and to see how I was doing. What a refreshing way to do this. This was applied also by a friend of mine in his business. He said, what I started doing was calling the people that work for me and say, today, I'm just interested in seeing what's going on with you. He said people found it so refreshing, and you actually heard the comments come back on how meaningful it was. So service can just be that kind of connection, just a simple connection. It says, I'm interested in you. It can be a giving of time. It can be a giving of time. I experience that with my kids. Problem I have nowadays is we'll sit around in the den and yeah, parenting is also about serving. We don't look at it that way, but the more I understand that my job is to serve them, we're going to use that the often missed side of serving here, but my job is to serve them. But when it comes down to serving in time, it does not count if we're sitting on the sectional couch and we're staring at the TV, or two people looking at their iPhones, or four people looking at their iPhones. That never really worked or counted well for Tom with me for service. I could rationalize it in my mind, but we're spending time together because we're sitting around the couch looking at the separate devices. But time and service is about, I am in here with you and I see you and I'm interested in what's going on with you. That's a level of service that people are hungry for, the giving of time. Now, the other side of that when it comes to service, and this is often missed, and it has to be delivered the right way, and that is having some of those conversations that say, you know what, I see you, I'm with you, and I believe that you can do better, and I just need to let you know that, and here's some ways to do that. Now, the giving of advice without being asked for it is a tricky one. But the coming up to someone and say, look, I've noticed something special in you. I could help you in that area. Or here's what I see that you could do to make yourself even better or to excel, is a gift. I can remember 3 people in my life that came up to me and said, I just need to make you aware that you can do more than what you're doing. I'll never forget those interactions, but it took a lot of courage on their part to give it. It's a level of serving. A lot of courage on their part to give it, and a lot of openness on my part to be willing to take it. Level of coaching, a degree of accountability in there that says, I'm going to serve you by telling you what I believe you can do better. And people often miss that one, or it's often misused. But it's having those conversations. Now, here's one thing about service as well. Service is defined by the receiver, not the giver. So when I mention these examples about, you look in business, family, these examples of high levels of service, from a customer standpoint, the best kind of service is defined in their eyes, not the giver's eyes. Now, the giver needs to be very aware of what they're seeing and what they're doing and what's playing out in front of them. If they have an offering, and they say, I have this to offer, I believe that can help you. But then again, it comes into a very high level of awareness about what you're seeing. But it's best defined in the eyes of the receiver, not the giver. That's the highest form of service. It can be done through a series of questions. So let me end this on an example that I ran across that kind of ties it in on a very simple action. Had a job shadowing day with my son, so he came to my office one day to job shadow. Now, if you leave yourself open and you watch and you listen to the comments and you ask, so you ask them what they're seeing instead of telling them what they're supposed to see. There's a place for that. But he was 12 at the time, so he had those wide open eyes of, here's what I'm seeing, and I don't mind telling you, the eyes of a child. So he went to this job shadowing event with me. I won't go into the details of that because it was quite funny, some of the stuff he did that you wouldn't normally do in that setting. but also some things he saw. But here's two things he saw. So he was on the other side of the desk from me, so somebody would call. So when somebody called, and he could hear through the phone, and I said, Lawson, son's name's Lawson. I said, Lawson, what did you hear? I was not expecting the answer that I got. I thought he was going to pick up some business, profound business statement that I had said, or the speaker had said. Here's what Lawson said. Dad, he talks a lot, but when you got into talking, he would cut you off. So he's a talker, but he doesn't listen well. Now, this is not being critical of the person that called me, because no one will ever know who that was, because I'll never tell. It just was me being aware that I can easily be that way. So my son said, it goes back to level of service, listen, talk when appropriate, but when someone else is speaking, listen. It's a level of service. Had those experiences before where you can be in a meeting or be in a group or be with somebody? You did nothing but actually listen or ask them questions about what they were involved in. And then the next day you'll get comments to go, wow, that was the nicest person I've ever met. They were absolutely fantastic. I'll do business with them. I want to do business with them. I want to get to know them better, even if it's not business. And you go, wait a minute, all I actually did was listen well. So the second thing that I saw on that job shadow day, which ties us all together, is there was a process that I learned about the same time. I learned a little bit earlier than I got the best advice I've ever received. And it was this. I had a little notebook I carry with me. It's one of those little things you can put in your back pocket. Used to keep a sheet of paper with a pen back there, but not organized enough. I would take that sheet of paper and write stuff on it, and then I'd leave it in my pants and get washed. Or I'd drop it, I'd leave it in the car and lose it. So I keep a little notebook, fits in my back pocket. Now, what I do with that notebook is I would walk around where I was working, and I would go up to people and say, so how have you been? How was your weekend? What's been going on with you? And if I knew them already, well, because if you do that enough time, you're going to hear about their family members. You're going to hear about their hardships. You're going to tell them about what they're proud of. They're going to tell you about those things. And let me tell you what I did this weekend. You're going to learn their interest. So if I knew them in advance, if I knew those details in advance, if I knew them long enough, that usually doesn't happen on the first conversation. But if you walk around and you say, hey, how was your weekend? I know you had mentioned that your mother had been ill. How's she doing? Or I know she have this interest. Now there's a line. Yes, you have to go into being very personal with it, but you can let them dictate that. And it's just a simple thing. Rather than walk around the office and say, I'm coming to check on you, I'm coming to edit you, or I'm going to say, I'm going to lead in with a question so that I can get to what I really want at the end, which is something from you. But I would keep that little notebook in my back pocket, and I was walking around that day, and I would ask those kind of questions. So how's it going? Did you have a good weekend? How's your family doing? Oh, I see that work you did. That looks great. It just some kind of leading, open-ended question. That last one was a statement. But again, it was an opportunity as I was with them to point out stuff that was doing well. But when they would tell me how it was going, sometimes I would say, here's what I need. Now, I was in a leadership position. So they would often say, yeah, oh, it went well, and they would give me a little bit of background. And by the way, can you check on this for me? So I would take out a little notebook. It wasn't my original idea. I learned it from the same guy that gave me the best advice I've ever received. So I would take out that notebook, and I would write the notes down in it, put it back in my pocket. And then I would follow up, which is the key to it. You have to pull that out, and next time you're walking around, if you say, remember last time you told me this? I checked on it, and here's what I found out. That will take you places. That is a level of service that many these days won't do, and it's just a simple tool. How did I know how effective it was? Well, I never really was sure at times. I never really was sure until 2 weeks after the job shadow. My son and I were in New York, and he was 12 at the time. And we're staying in Times Square, and we're looking out the window, and we see the skyscrapers, and you just feel the money, the rewards, all kinds of things that you feel in New York's exciting type city. And I said, Lawson, look at that building across the street there. Look at all those offices. Would you like to work in one of those offices? Now, he didn't give the answer I expected. I thought he would see all that's going on and the buzz and the potential to make all this money and the job and the excitement. So I said, Lawson, what would you think about working there? He paused for a second. He said, Dad, I wouldn't like it much. I said, why is that? He goes, because that's an awfully big building and there's a lot of people in there. And I bet the boss does not have time to walk around and get to know the people that work for him. And it was that moment I understood the power of what he was seeing and the power of what I've been taught. Not always done, and I wish I had done that. I do it more often now since I realize it. It's never too late to change it. But I realized at that moment the power. And that service is defined by the receiver. And if you ask the right kind of questions and then take action on it, that's a winning combination. So I appreciate you listening to me. I don't take one single listener for granted. And as always, reach out to us at soulmindedbusiness.com. There's a little place in there you can put your email address. We have some cool stuff coming out. It's not fees as you put your email in there. It says subscribe, but there's no fees associated with subscribing. We have some questions there. But as always, you can reach out to me directly at jd@soulmindedbusiness.com. And with this concludes this podcast. And we wish you all the best. Peace.